Hello.
Hi, this is Barry Duncan.
Hey, Barry, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I apologize for any inconvenience that you may have had trying to get in. It must be the alligators down there in Florida eating up the lines.
Something's going wrong. I'm not sure what it is. I never received the invite to be a co-host, and so I'm not sure what all that's about. But still, when I could never be able to see the video, so here we are.
Well, I'm glad that you were patient enough to walk through it with us, and thank you very much. This is, amongst our initial, we're just getting back and using this technology, so we'll get all the bugs worked out. Right now, we've got Dr. Luther Virgil in the room with us. We've got a few other folks, and we were just talking about you.
Absolutely, Barry. How are you doing? This is Dr. Virgil. It's nice to hear from you.
Hi, very good to be here. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I was just sharing with some individuals in our audience about how much I've heard that you are a well-respected therapist, and how I have a keen interest in just hearing about your thoughts and ideas about how you came up with the Partners for Change outcomes management system and the things you're doing there with the Better Outcomes organization.
Great. Happy to always talk about that stuff. I retain my passion for it over these many years.
It sounds like you have a passion for a lot more than just that. From what we can see is, first of all, let me let our audience know that you're a psychologist, a trainer, and a researcher with over 17,000 hours of clinical experience. And you're also the CEO of Better Outcomes Now. And you are the developer of the clinical process of the evidence-based practice, the Partners for Change Outcome Management System, which is called the PCOMS, and a leader of the team responsible for the PCOMS scientific credibility and evidence-based status. And what that means to me is, when going through a certification course for CARES, which is Certified Addictions Recovery Empowerment Specialist, I'm sure you know, this was the prerequisite to read your book. And it was because it was really focused on change. Would you say it's fair to say that is at the core of everything that you're doing?
Absolutely. The whole process is about change and people making the changes in their lives that they would like to see, and feeling empowered and knowing that if they harvest their own resources to do that, their chances of success are very good.
Okay. Well, measuring the change is an important thing, and I think that's the difference now. A lot of people in recovery are beginning to really take a look at the many pathways, and it's the reason that there's a certification is because we can measure the change, and we can only measure the change as a result of your system. Can you talk a little bit about the PCOM system?
Sure. First, it's good to know that it's the only system of its kind that actually evolved from practice, not from research to begin with. It came from my work with people, and over the years, I've worked with a lot of people that struggled with the misuse of substances and addiction, and so that's been an integral part of the way I've worked for many years. And it began out of my desire just to make sure that people's own view of how they were doing were privileged in that process. And so I developed a process called client-directed work that privileged the consumer in all aspects and really tried to harvest resources and get people's own views of how they can change. It evolved from that point, and that led to the co-development of the measures. And then I developed the process of using the measures, in counseling and in therapy. One of the things that kind of led me to thinking about the whole notion of being client-directed is, I cut my teeth in an inpatient chemical dependency unit. It was my first real job after graduate school. I worked in a variety of different placements and done a variety of things, but my first full-time real job was an inpatient unit. As useful as the 12-step program is, and believe me, I know that it's very useful.
Right.
And it's seen enormous amounts of people helped by it, but there was still this portion of people that did not respond. And, it really dawned on me that it's like we got to stop blaming people who don't respond, and instead do something different and try to find out how they can then motivate themselves to be different and do different things. So that got me thinking about things in a lot of different ways, those early experiences. And so it also kind of keyed me into to measuring outcomes, to know whether or not we're successful. So then we can have the conversation that this doesn't seem to be working for you. So what else can we do? And what are your thoughts about that? And then the second piece of that kind of PCOMS process is that we're checking in about the relationship all the time, because we know that the number one reason that helping relationships don't work is because the client, the consumer, doesn't think it's a very good fit for what they're looking for. So if we monitor that as well as the change itself, we can keep a lot of people from falling through the cracks. So that's how it kind of evolved over time, and then that led to the development of these two very brief measures that you know about. And it combined, my work with client-directed work and harvesting resources and that kind of view, plus a very relationally based perspective of working with people, and kind of put those things together, and that's where PCOM starts. And it's good for people to always remember that the key words for PCOMs are partners for change, because it's a collaborative effort between the helper, the peer, whoever it is that's trying to be a change partner. It's a collaborative effort with the person who, is seeking the change in their life.
I hear you being very intentional about your language as well. I know that there's a language that's used in 12-step programs, and for some reason people are threatened when there's change. But I hear you being very intentional about the language. How did that come about, and why is that?
Well, a lot of the language in our field, I've not been very impressed with, and some parts of, it's almost like people have to come to the table saying that somehow they're broken, scarred, incomplete, or sick in some ways. And I think that starts us out in a hole. And not to say that we're perfect or we all have things that we can work on and be better at. I just didn't like the mentality that, people would, in some way that everybody is in some way not a whole person. And I don't think that's a very good place to start in terms of making a change. And of course, as you know, I advocate for flipping that around and instead doing an inventory of what your strengths and resiliencies are, and harvesting those aspects of yourself to help you overcome the adversity, help you overcome, the urges and the things that influence you to do harm to yourself. So, I kind of start from that at ground zero rather than, the other side of things. And again, I'm not doing that to throw, the field or 12-step under the bus, because doing an inventory, a personal inventory, is an important thing to do. I'm saying, though, that sometimes starting off with there's something basically wrong with me is a hard place to find resources in that kind of a viewpoint. So that's my whole point there. So the whole point of language made me just kind of rethink that and not use those terms to describe human beings, but to use other terms.
Well, and I'd appreciate that as well. It really takes the recovery process to another level. And it does, especially not only for the newcomer, for people that have been in recovery for a long term. We need to really take ourselves to another level and start looking at what's right with us. And so,
Sure. I'll tell you one of the things too that I find of interest, Barry, is I kind of cut my teeth a little bit also in the research arena. I did a lot of work with research for HIV. Being an infectious diseases physician, during the time of HIV, we were involved with a lot of clinical trials and those things. And I noticed that your system uses evidence-based findings to assist in passing out the actual types of recommendations that you give in creating your system. Use that everyday space. Tell me a little bit about how you went about that situation of getting the evidence-based data.
Sure, great. Thanks for your interest in that. A lot of people are interested.
He is. That's all we know.
I kind of, morphed into a researcher, and it all kind of came from necessity. I was a full-time practitioner and loved it, and still love clinical work. But out of necessity, I knew this stuff was useful in my practice. But to take the next step and show that it indeed improves outcomes and engages people more in their change was another step altogether. So, it started with kind of doing the psychometric studies to make sure that the measures were reliable and valid. So we went through that process, and we did a couple of quasi-experimental studies where we implemented in different agencies. We measured before and after their implementation of PCOMs, and we saw that, wow, it improved outcomes. And then, I really took the plunge and knew that if anybody was going to pay attention to our results and what we were getting, that we had to do the gold standard, the randomized clinical trial.
Right.
So we did our first one in Norway, because that was the first place we got any support to do it. And Norwegians took this whole notion of PCOMs very quickly, a lot more quickly than here in the States, because they have a very egalitarian culture where they believe that everybody's on a level playing ground. So they like the whole notion of, from top to bottom, that collaborated with people who are trying to change. In fact, they were the first government in the world that mandated, joint decision-making in medical and psychological care. But at any rate, so we did our first RCT there, and now we're, 8 RCTs later, where we've shown the same feedback effect, that if you engage people in their own service, and you track whether or not they're benefiting or not, and you track whether or not they see a good alliance or relationship, and then you alter your service based on that feedback, it improves outcomes quite substantially. And now 8 randomized clinical trials show it, and we've showed it with mandated clients for substance misuse. Mm-hmm. We've showed it with kids, with adults, with couples, with families. And, since I was, came from a substance use background, I was very interested, because people would always say to me, well, Barry, what about folks that don't want to be there? What about mandated people? As if they're any different than other human beings. I always was kind of amazed by that, because I know in my own practice, still, if you create a good working alliance with people, whether they're mandated or not, they'll engage in the service and benefit from it. So, and yes, there are challenges with people who don't want to be there, but nevertheless, it's still a human endeavor, and we can make it work under those circumstances. So I was very excited when we got the opportunity at Fort Hood to work with returning Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who were mandated into treatment for substance abuse. And they were mandated because of driving while under the influence, or domestic violence, or bar fights, or, a variety of things. And so their choice would either be discharged from the military or go to treatment. You can't get much more mandated than that. Right. And we found this feedback effect. We found that people in the feedback condition achieved far more change than people who didn't have feedback a part of their work. And the best part about that study, and I want to make sure I give Don Schumann credit. He was the on-site person who did the lion's share of the work with this. But the good thing about that study is that we used blinded commander ratings of soldier reintegration. So these are people who didn't know what treatment the person that they were in the PCOMS group or the non-PCOMS group. And those soldiers who were in the PCOMS group had much better reintegration into their units after treatment, as rated by these commanders. So, that's been our story in terms of research over the years. And we just finished a randomized clinical trial of primary care. As you probably know, a lot of services are being rendered in primary care now, behavioral services. So it was kind of our next one to take a look at, and I'm in the process of working with the statistical folks to do the data analysis, and then we'll write it up. But that's been our journey.
Well, and one of the reasons I bring that up, that you are aware that when you're trying to bring out a new system and you're trying to have it accepted, you know, even with sometimes we can see these things from a standpoint of how we're treating our clients and our patients, we can see significant outcomes. But in order to make that change, in order to have that acceptability of that change, you have to have the clinical trials, those randomized clinical trials especially, and you have to have that kind of data, that evidence-based data, for it to become an accepted form of practice. And I will say that when we worked in the field of HIV, one of the most important studies that ever occurred that showed us that we could actually find treatments for individuals who had this bad viral disease was when we worked with individuals in the military. We got military, some soldiers involved who were infected, and you know, basically under orders and that kind of stuff, we had really good adherence to therapy and saw tremendous outcomes compared to people out in the regular, just in the regular field who weren't in the military. And it allowed us to know that these things could work. So I can only imagine how you guys must have felt when you did your trial there and saw the big change in outcomes. And
as a client, I'd like to say that so it's important that we are able to do more work peer-to-peer. And I'm glad that you focused in on that, and that both of you are champions of that. And this is a process that allows us to self-heal with each other. And we know that one person, and in the HIV arena, there's a need for this same type of strategy. And so hopefully we'll be able to present this. But let me let our folks that are just joining us and the people that are on Facebook Live let you know that this is the Rise for War community. And we're here with Dr. Barry Duncan, who's debunking the myth that only a therapist can help you change your life and show you how positive change can really happen when you utilize your inherent strengths and resources and are supported by relationships that take your innate goodness as a given. Barry is the author of many books, but the one that we're focusing on today is the book entitled What's Right With You, which gives a research-validated 6-step plan for a dynamic and refreshing approach to effecting change in your life for good. And so welcome to all of you that are joining us. We'll be doing a lot more of this in the coming days. But right now, I'm glad you could make it because Barry's dropping some science on us.
Well, you know, the other thing is that, you know, the idea that permeates the field of, you know, this kind of, I call them the killer Ds, diagnosis, dysfunction, disorder, disability, all that stuff that we kind of hang on people, the idea that was, you know, where change could evolve from. And if you look at research specifically about how change happens, I mean, take it apart from the PCOMS research I was just talking about, but if you look at change about how people, you look at research about how people change, you know, in any kind of service, the overwhelming majority of it comes from the person themselves and activating, you know, what they walk in the door with rather than anything they're going to get from the service or treatment or help. And just kind of wrapping your head around that is, you know, an important place to start. And then from there, knowing then that it's the relational context between the people involved is what's going to account for the next most portion of change. And then finally, you're going to get around to, you know, one of the least things that influence change. Again, this doesn't mean that it doesn't affect change at all, but, you know, kind of what approach you're using is kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of what creates the context for change. So, you know, we just have to kind of line up what we're doing more with that in mind, I believe. And that's, of course, what I'm promoting in the book, that you look at your own innate abilities to change. I mean, human beings, you know, there's no conceivable way that we would have survived on this planet unless we were just so amazingly resourceful. I mean, human beings can overcome anything. If you look at the history of people on this planet, undue circumstances, trauma, I mean, people survive and thrive, even in horrendous circumstances. So I don't know how we ever got the idea that people were not capable of changing themselves, because people changed a long time before there were interventions to help people change. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with the interventions to help people change, but we need to not lose sight of the stuff that makes change happen is already existing in the person that we're talking with. And whether you take that from a religious point of view, I know my grandmother always told me, God doesn't make junk. And so, I mean, there was that innate belief in the goodness of people, or you take it from another perspective, it just seems that change emanates from people far more so than change is dependent on finding what's wrong with people and then fixing what's wrong with people. So, so that's the basis of the book, and just the first part of that 6-step plan is to kind of challenge the belief system that there's something wrong with you. And, I've said to people a few times that maybe the only thing is wrong with you is that you believe that there's something wrong with you. It's, and there's a lot more to be gained, I think, from kind of just thinking about your life in a different perspective. And, some of the questions can be very helpful, just in terms of, think of a time that was rough for you in your life, but you overcame that adversity. And what strengths and resources did you use? What friends or family or spiritual resources did you use? Just thinking about yourself in a more, I guess, a holistic way is a way of thinking about that.
Well, you are preaching to the choir right now, Barry.
Absolutely.
I can speak for myself, and doctor can do likewise. I was diagnosed with HIV positive in 1988, probably contracted in 84. I've had, was also have been in recovery from drugs and alcohol since 1985, and have watched the evolution of both of those industries, as it were, in my own personal experience. And so, yes, we go through things, and that's been a lifestyle that I've had to use in order to get here. Through God's grace and through tapping into spirituality. And the 12-step process really leads us to do that as well. But what you've done, if I might say, is you've given it shape and form and a way to take it to another level. And so I find myself interacting. I have conversations now with my children, with my grandchildren that are different, because they are focused on the training and the information that I got from going through the certification, which was based on what's right with you in your book. So I personally want to thank you.
You're very welcome. That's very kind of you to say, Reggie. And I should give credit to George Brott for the way he's incorporated that in the CARES program. And he's done a lot to advance peer support kind of interventions, and in not only in Georgia but across the U.S. And so it's been very gratifying to see it kind of carried in that direction, because that's it makes so much sense to be a place where people can connect to peers and have that level of discourse about their lives, even separate from, kind of the gaze of the system would be I don't know if you're familiar with that language, but the first time when you go into the system of behavioral health or mental health or psychiatric health or any of that stuff, I mean, you're under the gaze of somebody. I mean, there's such a hierarchy involved. I mean, it's the expert and the patient, and it's a weird dynamic. And right. And actually, in my work, it's a dynamic I had to overcome to be helpful with people in terms of making it be a more collaborative endeavor. But peer-to-peer it's set up in such a more real human dynamic way. I believe that really these kind of ideas can be very useful to. And I think that it makes sense to peers more so at first pass than it does to trained mental health professionals. I think that there's a real common sense kind of resonation with this stuff with people that don't have the detriment of their training to overcome.
I feel like we might be at the butterfly effect as well, that we may hopefully we can help this concept reach critical mass by helping to proliferate it here in our area, but also by using this technology. So I'm glad that you agreed to join us. I apologize for any technical difficulties that we had. But going forward, we'd love to be able to say that we are connected to the Father of what's right with you, and give other people an opportunity, like you can do in this format, to come in and ask you questions and talk to you one-on-one.
Great, that would be fine, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I appreciate your applying these ideas in the way that you are, and as far as the technology, you know, it's great when it works, but you know, obviously when it's new, happened. And I'm sorry for my part in that I, you know, had a difficult time kind of figuring it out. So sorry about that, and maybe we can do it again sometime in the future.
That would be great, I think, myself. From my personal belief, that would be absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of individuals will be interested in this, and I think that, you know, we definitely should look to try to do something like this in the future, and we have the capability also to have a lot more individuals who may not have had the opportunity to share and hear and learn from you today.
That would be great.
Well, sure. We will continue to blast this out Facebook Live. People will be able to access this information in so many ways that, you know, it's not even me even really getting started on saying that. But thank you so much, Barry, for joining us today and working through all the kinks to bring us this science and this information. Thank you for all that you've done. And I would be remiss. I know that for clinicians, I'm not sure who is the target audience, but don't you have an event coming up sometime in the early part of next year?
Right. We have our annual Training of Trainers conference the last week of January in West Palm Beach in Florida. So if folks want to escape the winter and come on down to South Florida, it's a great way to learn everything you need to know to train others in the Partners for Change Outcome Management System, PCOMS, and also get all the training materials that I use, all the slide packages and everything in that. So basically everything you need to do to implement PCOMS and train others.
And people can find out more and register at betteroutcomesnow.com. Is that the spot?
That's the spot, betteroutcomesnow.com.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, but you won't. It won't be the last time you heard it. Thanks again, Barry, for joining us, and thanks for everything.
All right.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
All right.
Thanks, guys. It's nice talking.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, Luther, that was Barry Duncan, man. What'd you think?
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed what he had to say. It was amazing, actually. It was fantastic to hear from the person who actually helped put together the information for that system, the system that's being used to treat people all over the country, all over the world, actually. And it was. I definitely think it would be worth our while to have him back on again, so that even more people can hear from him, and we can have some more questions, especially questions from individuals who are watching now and will be watching in the future.
And when you watch in the future, you can put your questions in the question area on the right-hand side. We'll check back, and that way we'll be able to plan for the next time. If you have anything that you wanted to chat about, feel free to do that in the chat as well. If you'd like to message me directly, you can do that by clicking on the red link that's on the top of the chats and the questions, and you'll see a little bit more about how this format is operating in the chat as well. We've got a lot of great stuff coming to you. We've got some interviews, and we call them interviews because that's where we go. We go inside, and we've got some folks lined up for you in the very near future, and you could be one of them. If you got a book, if you've got some information that is focused on wellness, awareness, and recovery, then we want to help you get your message out to the masses as we build the Rise for War community at riseforwarcommunity.tv. So you can visit us on Facebook at Rise for War. You can come straight to the community at Rise for War community.tv, or you can go to our web portal and get to everything at riseforwar.com. Look, anything else you want to tell them?
Oh, I just want to say to the individuals who are watching on Facebook Live, Donnell, a couple of the other guys that I saw here that came through, thank you very much. And for those who are on Facebook Live, we also have ways that you guys can put in questions. So we can also have you be part of these presentations, okay? So we're looking forward to seeing you guys in the future.
All right. Well, it's been fun, but we got to run. We'll see you on the other side of the moon. Until the next time, peace.
Peace.
And blessings.